Hoffman to come forward and the Reverend Kathy Moody-Arndt to come forward. And we're going to find a way to kind of share our microphones. We do that in part for those folks who might have some hearing impairment, but we also do it for the recording. It helps greatly in the recording. So welcome one and all. Why don't we take just a moment and have you introduce your esteemed selves to us. So why don't we start with the person who probably has the most awareness in our congregation, Jim Schimmel. Jim, would you begin and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
My real steamed self, is that just I'm not sure what you want. You know who I am. I'm here. I'm glad to be here. I could say that I found this church by default. When I came out as a gay retired minister, there weren't a lot of churches scrambling for me to be a member there. But I feel, I once looked out and I said, have you ever seen a bigger collection of oddballs in your life? And I feel very much at home. So I think we'll just leave it at that and go from there. Now you're Steve. Okay.
I'm Greg Hoffman. Many of you know me as Alan's partner. I'm from a slightly different tradition, but very similar to the Disciples of Christ. The United Church of Christ is the denomination to which I was ordained. And my ministry, just to give you a little background, I was ordained to a position that was in the South Bronx of New York City, doing chaplaincy, pastoral care with persons with HIV and AIDS who were in a residential facility. And then my ministry sort of morphed into a more administrative ministry in the most recent years. I'm now working as a database manager at the national offices of the United Church of Christ here in Cleveland. And I'll tell you more about that detail later.
Yes.
Well, I'm Reverend Kathy Moody-Arndt.
We're gonna turn that down just a little bit. So.
And probably most of you don't know very much about me. That's a little more, maybe Jim. The end of June.
Let's use this one. See if that's better.
At the end of June, my husband Ken and I retired as United Methodist ministers, and I was a United Methodist pastor for 26 years, serving mostly urban churches, and I served what was People's Hope United Methodist Church here in Cleveland at the corner of West 65th and Bridge from 90 to 96, and that place is now called Nehemiah Mission, where people from all over the world actually come and do work on homes in the neighborhood. But when I was there, it was mostly working for congregation, and it was a good time in my life.
Well, welcome. Let's welcome our guest panelists. The subgroup of the New Visioning team that planned today had all kinds of options in front of them, including doing a spiritual retreat or bringing in some guest speakers from outside. And we may do some of those things in the future, but we thought that we would gather folks from within our congregation, new as they may be, to talk a little bit about spiritual gifts. Hopefully you all have worked on your survey or are working on your survey. If you're not, you will be given a chance to do that. I will reinforce the fact that these are not going to be turned in because we really want this to be a spiritual exercise for you. We think it will also help the congregation for the future, but we really want it first and foremost to be an opportunity for you to explore your own spiritual gifts. So we'll talk more about that. But let's begin with a question. One of the big questions that we've had as we've been planning this is we keep saying, well, we're doing a spiritual gift. Well, no, we're doing kind of a talents. Well, no, we're doing gift. Well, we're not sure. The language. So we've been talking about spiritual gifts. So what is the difference between a spiritual gift and just a good old-fashioned, regular, meat, potatoes, secular talent or skill? Who wants to take that one first?
Go for it. You're the newest person here, so go for it.
If you see it as a secular gift, then it's all about you. But if it's spiritual, then you see it as something that God has graced you with, and so I think you use it differently, and you're not just trying to make yourself look good, but you're thinking, how can I more fully serve God?
I'm going to give a slightly different tack to that. I feel like I'm on What's My Line? I'm not sure that there really is a distinction between the two. For example, when I was a teenager, I played the organ on a Saturday night at a skating rink. On Sunday morning, I played at a church. Now, it was when I played the flea hop, and on Saturday night, a secular talent. And when I played the Bach toccata and fugue in D minor on Sunday morning, that was a spiritual gift. I'm glad that the writer of John did not say God so loved religious institutions that he sent his only begotten Son. And I just have, more and more in my life, I just don't see a division. I hear what you're saying, but I don't see a division in the gift itself. The division might be more in how we deal with it or use it.
What you do with it.
So I don't think we're in disagreement here. It's just I would want to say that the gift, I think all gifts and talents are given by God, and they're interchangeable as to whether we use them in I'm not even sure what a totally secular manner would be, actually. I think God came to us to make the profane sacred, not the other way around. So now let's turn it over. Let's get the definitive answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I'm sitting in between sort of the two spectrum ends, and I would agree with both, as Jim has just mentioned, that I don't find a distinction between my secular gifts and my spiritual gifts. I think what makes it different for me is the motivation with which I use my gifts, and certainly the gifts of administration, which is the work that I do currently, have a spiritual component to them. Alan often comes to my rescue when I'm talking with strangers about my work, and they hear that I'm a minister, and so they immediately jump to the conclusion that I have a church. And many ministers do, of course, but that's not what I'm called to be doing. And so I manage a database, which might sound very dry and boring to many of you out there. Or some of you might actually do that in your own work, and so you might identify with what I'm about to say. But the work that I do is recording of gifts that people have generously given to the church. And it's a very profound and spiritual experience for me to be a part of that process, because giving is, of course, part of our spiritual discipline in the church. And so I get to honor that gift from others, both a tangible gift as well as the spiritual gift. And our database is such that we can connect that person with their family, their own local church, as well as our denominational departments. So it's a collective effort on my part, and it's a way of connecting people both with their own spiritual gifts and the gift of generosity.
Sort of piggybacking on all of this, I think we need to recognize, and I'm glad you brought up right from the beginning how we use it, and whether it's for self-glory or to the glory of God, because the church, I think, is so incredibly vulnerable to people making a spiritual gift claim simply for self-glory. When I was a student in seminary, one of my teachers, Dr. Randolph Crump Miller, we called him Candy Rump, but that's beside the point. He would get up, and his field was education, and he said, never, ever, never, ever accept a volunteer Sunday school teacher. And then he would go on and say, as a matter of fact, it's good policy in the church not to accept volunteers for anything. Decide over a period of time who really has gifts for what, and go and ask them. Because volunteers too often tend to be bullies, especially in Sunday schools. I appreciated the wisdom of his comment when I violated that rule a couple of times in churches over my career. I remember somebody that volunteered to be an elder, and I thought, well, let's go ahead with this. I can assure you he did not serve beyond his first year. because we all saw that we had made a terrible mistake. So we are terribly vulnerable to the use of a nice-sounding spiritual offering of ourselves when it's quite often just the opposite.
So to kind of clear that up a little bit, Jim, when you talk about volunteer, you're not talking about the difference between paid and unpaid.
No,
you're talking about the difference between whether someone jumps in
exactly. No,
and whether or not you call them to that position.
Matter of fact, some of the paid people shouldn't be either.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Okay, anything else? Oh, and I did want to say, from all three of you, it's very clear to me that you're not saying when you use a gift in the church or for church purposes, it becomes spiritual. And when you use it outside the church then it's secular. So I didn't hear any of you say that. It's really about motivation, it's about other things.
Actually, that's almost too much a religious question.
Okay.
And I appreciate your asking it.
Because that's what a lot of us think.
Yes, and we think it's what we do in church, and that it's religious, therefore it's spiritual. I have this strong feeling that God could care less about what happens in church most of the time. I think God is concerned about hungry people out there, and starving people out there, and homeless people out there, and oppressed people out there. I think God is far more concerned about what's happening in Syria than God is about what's happening at Franklin Circle Christian Church. Excuse me, Pastor. And I know Alan well enough to know that he knows I'm not criticizing his question, but I appreciate the question coming up. It isn't because it takes place in church that it's sacred. It's because it's from God.
Well, and one thing that I've found now as a retiree is that you don't spend all your time in church things, so you got to be out there in the world, and there's a lot of people out there that don't necessarily, they're not too excited if they know you're a Christian, and you have to struggle with how to present yourself, and yet at the same time, you want to genuinely use your spiritual gifts. And I mean, I got to really give a hand to the laity. I think it's a hard road you have to go to really find concretely how to express your faith and to use those gifts.
Let's move on to our second question. How did you go about, which is to say, how did you go about discovering your gifts and graces and talents? And would you be willing to share one or two or some of the ones that you've discovered over your life?
I'm going to jump in on this one. You are going to learn I talk too much, so get used to it.
We are.
I was telling her to get used to it. I liken myself very much to the prophet Jeremiah. I absolutely love to preach, for example. I mean, I am almost inside on fire with the opportunities to preach. And I think of a line, I don't know exactly where it is, I don't remember verse and chapter exactly, but I remember where Jeremiah is quite miffed with God. And Jeremiah turns to God and says, "You have made a laughingstock of me, and I'm sick and tired of it. You told me to go tell the people to either ship up or you're going to shape them out. Or shape up or you're going to ship them out, right? I told the people they needed to shape up. Nothing happened when they ignored me." And he said, "I'm sick and tired of turning around and saying, 'Well, God, and you're not there.'" And then Jeremiah says, "I'm not going to preach for you anymore, God. I'm just not going to do it anymore. You don't back me up." And then you hear him saying, I think in a much quieter voice, "But when I try to hold it in, it's as though there is a burning in my bones, and I get weary trying to hold it back." For me, the fact that the preaching may well be a gift that has been given to me comes out of that burning. I couldn't hold it back if I wanted to.
Jim stands in quite a contrast to me. The first question in the questionnaire that you all have received, I enjoy working behind the scenes, taking care of little details. That's me. So actually being up here makes me uncomfortable because I'm not a person that likes to be in the limelight. The first experience I had with being a more administrative or detail person was when I was growing up in my home church back in Pennsylvania. I think it was one of the first high schooler to serve on our church board, which was in that tradition called the consistory. and then went on to college and came back to the church after returning from college. And it was really the community itself that confirmed for me my gifts for ministry. I sort of glossed over them and said, well, those are nice things that I do, but nothing out of the ordinary. But it was the community itself that really challenged me to look at myself and confirmed for me the gifts that God had given me and the calling to which God was calling me.
For me, I think my first spiritual awakening was in youth group. And I was really blessed to go to a church where there were lots of youth activities and just a whole range of kinds of things you could do. And some of them very spiritual, some of them just kind of fun, just all kinds of activities. And it gave me a chance to explore my faith and who I was and see how people would respond. But I guess I also need to say that I'm getting old. And I grew up in a time where you didn't have, for the most part, you didn't have women clergy. So I didn't have people saying, oh, yeah, you really could be a wonderful preacher. That wasn't something that I thought of at all. And what I wanted to do was to marry a preacher. And that's what I did. And it didn't work. This is pre-kin.
Oh, pre-kin, got it, okay. All right.
And it was after that God really surprised me when I felt God calling me to be a pastor myself. And so I think sometimes feedback is very important, but sometimes the people we surround ourselves with aren't people who have a full understanding of an appreciation for who we are and who we can be, and we have to be kind of careful that we try to find those who will really affirm all our possibilities and allow us to really develop. And I guess discernment is the spiritual gift I kind of discovered as a youth, and that's kind of been a very important part of my whole life as I've sought to really understand what is it that God wants me to do. And sometimes I get it wrong, and sometimes I get it right. And when I'm on track, it's kind of like a high, because I have a real sense of peace and like, wow, this is really what God wants me to do. And now again, as a retiree, it's like, it's a whole other situation. And so discernment, again, is really a spiritual gift I'm holding on to try to figure out who I need to be and what God wants to do with me.
Cool. So is it fair enough to say that, Jim, you talk about a spiritual gift that burns within you that you can't help but experience?
In spite of yourself.
In spite of yourself.
Because I didn't want to go into preaching. I wanted to go into theater, for crying out loud.
So you got both.
And any of you who heard me preach know that I did.
And then, Craig, is it fair enough to say you're talking about sometimes your gifts are confirmed by the community, that you don't even see them, but the community comes back and kind of shows a mirror up to you? And then, Kathy, you're talking about sometimes you have to leap over the community. Sometimes you have to trust your gut, go with some discernment, and it may even take time to discover some of those gifts. Okay, well, let's move on, unless you have anything else to say on that. So our final question is, this whole day, and just so you know, what we're going to do with those wonderful surveys is every time a new member joins the church, that will be part of their initiation into the church, and they'll be invited to take that survey so that it'll be an ongoing process. And we're also hoping to have retreats. There's some folks, met some wonderful folks at Adult Conference that do spiritual gifts work, that we might bring them in and do some things. Wanda and Roy Johnson? Anyway, but Tom Johnson, that's it. So it begs the question, why do we do all this? Why do you need to understand your spiritual gifts? I mean, isn't it just enough to use them? Why would you take any time to try and think about your spiritual gifts or discern your spiritual gifts? Shouldn't they just be obvious that you use them?
I mean, they're not necessarily obvious to me.
Okay.
And even the surveys don't necessarily clear it up.
Right.
Because I take different spiritual gifts surveys, I come out different on every one.
Fair enough.
So yeah, you just have to keep reflecting, and I think the circumstances in your life have an impact on which ones of your gifts you use more fully. Sometimes there's more opportunities in one way to serve than in another. So I don't think it's a real simple answer.
But you would say it's still worthwhile, worthy of your time to discern, whether it's through a survey or through some other way of doing it.
Right, and just maybe talking to people you trust and getting feedback and giving them feedback.
Okay. Why do we need to understand spiritual gifts?
I think in the same way, I think of my gifts being used in a contextual format. There might be a church setting, or a secular setting, or my work setting, which sometimes is both, where my gifts might vary based on the need. So I participate in whatever way I can based on that particular context. And I think what motivates me is the calling that God has for the liberation of everyone in the world. And so it's that larger, bigger, broader picture of what we can do together that we can't do alone.
What we want to do and what gifts we still have available to us, I think, change over a period of time. I'm not getting old. I already did it. I'm way ahead of you on that one, my friend. I was once a musician, actually. I was a church organist, soloist, and believe it or not, a drummer. In the meantime, in my 50s yet, I developed diabetic neuropathy. I could not earn a living or give a gift to a church at the organ or the piano, no matter how desperately I wanted to. Nor could I hold the drumsticks properly to play drums. That was my druthers in a way, besides theater, was really being a church musician. I was hired when I was 14 to be a church musician. I loved it, but it wasn't to be. The gifts change. Sometimes some are destroyed and new ones are given. And what I have now as a gift is a greater capacity to relate to people with chronic pain, profound disappointment, frightening illnesses, and to know how they feel. And I find more and more opportunities to use those gifts when the others would have been a heck of a lot of fun to follow through.
We're at our end. Any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say?
I'm not sure I like saying we're at our end, just as we are still friends, aren't we?
We are. I was going to say, and what a beautiful end it is. That might be too personal. I, for one, and I think you can join me in saying, I thank God that these wonderful folks up here discerned their gifts, had them reaffirmed in different ways, and used them and still use them to God's glory. So let's give thanks. The group that planned this, and actually I want to take just a moment. If you were on the planning team for this, would you please stand or raise your hand? Some of them may be down. Actually, most of them are probably downstairs now. But we give thanks for your good work too. Make sure you thank them. Some of them are downstairs. You all can go ahead. We realized that any three of you, or four of you, or all of you could have been up here on stage, and we could have asked you the very same questions. So instead of doing that and taking several weeks to do it, you all would probably get a little antsy being in church that long. What we decided to do is to have a luncheon, and you're going to be invited in just a moment to go downstairs, and part of what we want is for you to talk about some of these very things that Jim and Kathy and Craig had the chance to talk about. But now, in classic Disciples format, it's the opportunity for you to respond. All of us are going to sing, and please, if you have one of the purple books, you'll want to share it with as many people as you can because there's so few of them. But if you're someone who is looking for affirmation of your gifts, your deep, deep gifts, Jesus Christ is one of those people who affirms who we are in amazing ways. And this is the time for you to come forward and ask God through Christ to affirm you as a person and your gifts and graces. Or if you're looking for a congregation where your gifts are affirmed in all their wonderful, wild diversities, this is an amazing place to have your gifts affirmed and reaffirmed. I would invite you to come forward. But let all of us now stand and sing together.